Brody Malone leads the pack at the halfway point of the Olympic selection process. Curran Phillips will return after withdrawing from nationals with an injury, and the Olympic team will be named this weekend. For those new here, I'm Kensley, the host of Neutral Deductions, a podcast all about men's gymnastics. This is episode 37, and I break down the best chance for each athlete to make it to the Paris Olympic Games.
This is the Neutral Deductions podcast. Men's gymnastic news, coverage, and analysis.
Before we dive in, just a quick note that I will not be providing coverage of Olympic trials via Neutral Deductions this week. I will be on site working with the amazing team at NBC, and due to a conflict of interest, will not be providing podcasts or articles this week. Gabe will be creating graphics per usual, and we've added a new volunteer to the crew who will provide a recap of night one of competition, so make sure to stay tuned and check out those updates. Okay. Diving into the Olympic trials preview, the U.S. men have invited 20 men to compete in Minneapolis for their shot at making the 5-man Olympic team. Unlike the women's program, the men's program has laid out a fairly strict set of criteria for making the Olympic team. And unlike the last Olympic Games for Tokyo, there is only one spot up for grabs to automatically make the team. So for this year, to automatically earn a spot to compete in Paris, an athlete must not only win the all-around at trials, but they also have to place top 3 on 3 events. And based on the results from the national championships earlier this year, no athlete would have automatically qualified. Now, Brody was close. After winning the all-around, he was first on high bar, second on still rings, and fourth on pommel horse. Brandon Dang, who was third on pommel horse, was not invited to compete at trials, so that opens up a spot on pommel horse for him. Looking at national results and the results from earlier this year, I really think there's only about maybe 4 athletes with the possibility of locking up that automatic spot. It's certainly not a guarantee that any athlete will be able to accomplish this feat, but if any could do it, I think it would be either Brody, Frederick, Coy, or Asher. And I expect that the athlete is going to need to win the all-around with a high 85 or even break the 86 mark. As I mentioned earlier, Brody was the closest, having won the all-around and then placing first on high bar and second on still rings. Of those competing at Olympic trials, only the 2 pommel horse specialists, Steven Nedorosik and Patty Hoops, beat him. But to be truthful, he is going to need a little bit of help to get in the top 3 on pommel horse. So Coy Young had a disastrous day 1 at nationals on pommel horse. He is, of course, the reigning silver medalist at the World Championships on pommel horse. So certainly capable of breaking that 15 mark and getting into the top 3. But if both pommel horse specialist and Coy Young perform their best at trials, Brody is not going to be able to lock up that automatic spot. So then we'll go down to who placed second, Frederick Richard. So for Frederick to lock up his spot, he will need Brody to be less than his best in the all-around, and then he will need to repeat performances on floor and high bar to lock up those top 3 finishes there. His big problem is having a third event to finish top 3 on. He is very good on parallel bars, but the problem is that many of his competition are just better there. It's a place where the U.S. is really, really strong. He's done a ton of work to improve rings, but it's really not likely that he's going to top the likes of Wittenberg, Malone, and Diab. I don't think that he's going to beat Patty Hoops or Steven Nedorosik or Coy Young for that third spot on pommel horse. It has been rumored that he has been training 2 vaults. So I think if he wants to lock up that spot, I think he's going to need 2 vaults that are competitive so that he can place top 3 on vault there. Now let's move on to Coy. So Coy is really interesting because his D score is much lower than many of the other all-arounders, but he's extremely clean. So he was the only other gymnast besides Brody Malone to break the 86 mark at nationals. And I actually think that Coy has the second best chance behind Brody to lock up this all-around spot. He was 4th on high bar, 2nd on P bars, 8th on pommel horse. Realistically, Curran Phillips is probably going to knock him down on parallel bars. Curran and Yule are just better than him there, but he absolutely has a chance to be third on parallel bars. Curran was unable to compete both days at nationals, and we expect him to be competing well at the Olympic trials. High bar can go any number of ways, so he could improve there. He could also drop there. He should be top 3 on pommel horse very easily. And then, in my opinion, if his coach is smart, he will have instructed Coy to do 2 vaults at trials to easily place top 3 there. So he is, again, the reigning silver medalist in the world on vault. And so I actually think he may have the advantage to be able to put that all together. So if he wins the all around, top 3 pommel horse, top 3 vault, and then maybe high bar or parallel bars is going to be his best shot at getting another top 3 finish. So my 4th pick for someone being able to lock up this automatic spot is actually Asher Hong. And Asher may seem like a really strange choice considering his performance at nationals, but in my opinion, he has to go for it here. His nationals performance was so detrimental, in my opinion, that I'm not sure he will be considered for the team unless he earns the spot outright. He is in no way, shape, or form absolutely out of it. That's not what I'm saying. But if I were him, I would not want to leave my shot at the Olympics in the committee's hands. Asher is absolutely capable of going high 85s in the all-around. He is easily top 3 in the country on still rings and parallel bars. He has 2 vaults. He's can definitely be top 3 there. And if he does, this means he will earn that automatic bid for Paris and potentially change the shape of the Olympic team on his own terms. Some may be asking, okay, well, what about Yule? Yule placed higher than him in the all-around. And if Yule does what I think Yule is capable of doing, then I think that he is on the Olympic team no matter what. I don't think he will be left off. But he's going to need a little bit of help to win the all-around, in my opinion. He is capable of doing so, but I just think that there are others here who are better. A weird day on day 1 kept him down in the standings, but his 85.75 day 2 was certainly very competitive. Yule's biggest downfall to meet this criteria is having a 3rd event to be top 3 on. He left nationals as a parallel bars champion and a silver on floor, but I honestly, without a lot of people having disastrous days, I just don't see where he is going to pick up that top 3 on a 3rd event. Now, if Brody or another athlete is able to lock up their spot on the Olympic team, then the men's program looks at the top 5 scoring team scenarios. And if the top team using the best 3 out of 4 days matches the best 4 out of 4 days of competition, that is the Olympic team. Now, there's a little bit more nuance to it, which is really long and a little bit more complicated than I want to explain here. So if you want a deep dive into those selection procedures, I will link that episode in the show notes and you should go back and listen to it there. So as I mentioned, it is possible for the Olympic team to be selected by straight math. And this is, in my opinion, probably the only way a true specialist is going to end up on this team. Just based on the documentation from the senior selection committee earlier this year, I really think that they are going to have a hard time justifying taking a 1 event specialist. Now, that being said, Steven Nedorosik currently shows up in many of the highest scoring team scenarios. For him to punch his ticket to the Olympics, in my opinion, I think he needs 2 things to happen. He needs the top all-arounders to be very consistent at trials, and he needs to hit 2 very good days at trials. At nationals, he hit 1 great routine and 1 mediocre routine. The selection is designed to give athletes sort of maybe a throwaway day, and he definitely wants that to be the mediocre day and not a bad day. So if Brody, Coy, Frederick, and Yule are consistent and Steven hits both days of trials, I think it is extremely likely that the team would be mathematically locked, which would be incredibly exciting for him after missing out on the team in 2020. Patty Hoops is in a really similar situation, so he needs the top all-arounders to be really consistent. He needs Steven to falter on pommel horse, and he needs to hit the routines of his life to lock up that automatic spot. For Alex Diab, the silvering specialist, unfortunately, I don't really see a way for him to make this team. While rings is an event that the U.S. isn't particularly strong on, it's also not an event that I think that he would be likely on to medal at the games, whereas I think the likes of Steven Nedorosik on pommel horse or Curran Phillips on parallel bars would be very strong contenders for those individual event medals. Of the non-all-arounders, I think that Curran Phillips has the best chance of being selected, but he has to be perfect, and he needs this selection to go to committee. So he got injured at nationals and needed to petition to trials. And based on my reading of the rules, because he won't have 4 days of competition, I don't think he will actually be eligible to be auto-selected for the Olympic team. However, as I've mentioned, I think it is pretty likely that it will end up going to selection. And I think that the selection committee will have taken notice that reigning parallel bars world champion Lucas Dalzer is injured, and I think that they will take that into consideration when considering Phillips's chance for a medal. He has hit 100% of parallel bar routines this year in competition with big competitive numbers. That being said, I'm not sure that parallel bars alone is enough to take him because the U.S. is so strong here. So at nationals, he did a great parallel bar routine, didn't do so well on high bar and vault. And I think that he is going to need 2 very clean vaults. Ideally, he has that Yurchenko triple that he has been training because I think they need more 5-6 vaults. And he also needs a usable high bar because while Brody and Frederick are great at high bar, and while Coy and Yule have certainly improved here, I don't think you really want to use either Coy or Yule on high bar in a team final if you don't have to. So for these specialists, it's really, really hard because it is so easy to be taken out of the running. And based on the inconsistency from nationals, I am not sure that the Olympic team will be auto-selected, meaning if one of the specialists doesn't get auto-selected to the team, the only one I think will really be seriously considered is Curran Phillips, maybe Steve, but we'll just end up having to wait and see how that will be played out. So the next criteria is almost certainly not going to come into effect, and that criteria is if the top scoring team within the different data sets is more than 2 points higher than the next highest scoring team, then that team will be auto-selected, and I just don't see a world in which this is going to happen. I mean, anything is possible, but based on the data that we saw from the national championships, I don't think that this is very likely. So then the next thing that it goes to is discretion from the senior selection committee. And I think that this is probably the most likely scenario. So after the highest ranking all-arounders, there is this sort of next group of all-arounders that I think really could be the 5th member of the Olympic team or could possibly make that perfect alternate. And that is Paul Judah, Cameron Bach, Colt Walker, Donnell Wittenberg, and Shane Wiskus. I think all 5 of these athletes are absolutely still in the running, especially since the U.S. won their first team medal in 9 years using a team of all-arounders. It's possibly a little bit of a safer strategy, but based on who the British and Ukrainian teams have selected and based on the data using those numbers, I think the U.S. using a team of all-arounders would still leave them as heavy favorites for the bronze medal. And the U.S. men want this team medal badly, and I think they'd be willing to leave a few extra tenths at home from a specialist to have a safer team. Now, of these athletes, Paul Judah and Donnell Wittenberg show up the most often in the highest scoring team scenarios. And then actually, really interestingly, Cameron Bach actually shows up higher than Paul Judah in some of the average data right now as well. The final athlete that I think is truly in the running for an Olympic team spot as defined by the U.S. Olympic Committee. So, the IOC does not recognize alternates as Olympic team members, but the U.S. Olympic Committee does. So the final athlete that I think is truly in the running based on that definition is Fuzzy Bennis. I think he's really a dark horse for an alternate spot. So Fuzzy had a really stellar collegiate season, and I think a little bit of improvement at trials could certainly keep him in the mix there. The rest of the athletes at trials, while certainly fantastic gymnasts, are in my opinion more the future of Team USA. They're the ones that you should be watching for LA 2028, not necessarily ones that I think are in heavy consideration for this Paris team. And those athletes include Jeremy Bischoff, Tate Costa, Josh Carnes, Kara Mandava, and Kai Umira. The competition for the U.S. Olympic trials is happening this week in Minneapolis. The U.S. men's competition will take place on Thursday evening at 5:30 p.m. Central and Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m. Central. The competitions will be streamed on NBC with Tim Daggett, Terry Gannon, and John Roethlisberger commentating. We have gotten another 5-star review here at Neutral Deductions, and this one says, "Awesome. Right on, Kensley. I've been a fan since you provided men's gymnastics coverage for Gymnastics, and I'm so glad that you've got your own podcast to bring us all the news. Thank you for your stellar coverage." If you would, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. It helps others find Neutral Deductions and learn more about men's gymnastics. If you're listening on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. If you would like to help bring more live men's gymnastics coverage, please consider donating. A massive thank you to Carrie, Dawn, and Jeffrey who donated in the last week. We are entirely listener supported at this point, and even $10 helps us cover a meal. The PayPal link is in every show note and at the bottom of every article on neutraldeductions.com. You can donate via PayPal or Stripe. If you have any questions, comments, or insider tips, you can email Kensley at neutraldeductions@gmail.com. That's all for this week. We'll see you next time.